Commander Zethkar had never questioned the natural order of the galaxy until the day humans arrived at Kepler Station. As a Valorian warrior, he stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights of the command center. His species had dominated known space for 3 centuries, their superior strength and tactical prowess legendary among the lesser races. Fear was a concept relegated to their primitive ancestors, a biological weakness bred out through generations of genetic refinement. The emergency klaxons echoed through the station's corridors as reports flooded in from the outer rim. The Devourers had returned. These ancient machines, thought destroyed millennia ago, had emerged from dark space with renewed hunger. Entire systems fell silent within hours of their arrival. Zethkar watched the tactical displays with growing unease as red markers indicated fallen worlds, each representing billions of lives consumed by the mechanical plague. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human vessel Indomitable," reported Lieutenant Veltar, her voice carrying the tension that gripped the entire bridge crew. The humans had only joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago, their small fleet contribution viewed more as a diplomatic gesture than a military asset. Most species regarded them as curious but ultimately insignificant, bipedal creatures from a backwater world called Earth. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a human female with short brown hair and intense blue eyes. Her uniform bore the insignia of an admiral, though she appeared impossibly young by Valorian standards. "Commander Zethkar, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We've analyzed the Devourer attack patterns and believe we can mount an effective defense." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement if the situation weren't so dire. "Admiral Chen, with respect, your species has no experience with threats of this magnitude. The Devourers consume entire civilizations. Perhaps your ship should evacuate civilians while more experienced forces handle the military response." The human's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that Zethkar couldn't identify. "Commander, we've faced extinction-level threats before. Our homeworld has been through ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and global wars that nearly ended our species. We learned something from each one. We adapt, we survive, and sometimes we even win." Before Zethkar could respond, proximity alarm screamed across the bridge. The first wave of Devourers had arrived at the system's edge, their massive forms blotting out starlight as they advanced. The initial reports from the sensor arrays defied belief. Hundreds of ships, each the size of a small moon, moved with mechanical precision toward the inner planets. Their hulls seemed to absorb light itself, creating dark voids against the cosmic backdrop. "All defensive positions," Zethkar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 battles. The Valorian fleet moved into formation, their crystalline hulls shimmering with energy shields. Allied forces from a dozen species joined them, creating an impressive wall of firepower. Yet as the Devourers drew closer, doubts crept into even the most veteran commanders' minds. The human ships took positions at the formation's edge, their design radically different from any other species' vessels. Where most civilizations favored smooth, efficient curves, human ships looked like they were built for war. Angular hulls bristled with weapon ports, armor plating showed evidence of repeated repair and reinforcement, and their engines burned with an angry red light that seemed to echo their creator's temperament. "Beginning combat maneuvers," Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communications array. Zethkar watched in fascination as the human ships broke formation, moving in patterns that seemed chaotic yet somehow coordinated. They attacked from impossible angles, their vessels performing maneuvers that should have torn them apart under the gravitational stress. The first Devourer ship opened fire, its weapons unleashing beams of pure entropy that aged matter to dust in seconds. A Thoraxian cruiser, its captain boasting 3 decades of combat experience, simply ceased to exist as the beam swept across its hull. The surrounding Allied forces faltered, their perfect formations wavering as primal instincts older than civilization began to surface. But the humans pressed forward. Their ships danced between the entropy beams with reckless precision, closing distance while larger vessels hung back in terror. Zethkar's sensors detected something impossible. Human vessels were accelerating beyond their rated specifications, their crews somehow surviving gravitational forces that should have liquefied organic matter. "How are they doing that?" Veltar whispered. her usual composure cracking as she watched human fighters weave through destruction that claimed ships 10 times their size. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos with unnatural calm. "All ships, this is indomitable. We're going to show these machines something they haven't seen before. Terror tactics, pattern Alpha 7. Make them understand what happens when you threaten human space." The human fleet suddenly changed tactics entirely. Instead of maintaining safe distances and trading long-range fire, they accelerated directly toward the Devourer formation. Their ships began broadcasting on all frequencies, not tactical data or surrender demands, but something far more unsettling. Human voices, thousands of them, began streaming across the communication networks. They were singing battle hymns, war chants. Even what sounded like drinking songs echoed through space as human vessels closed to point-blank range, with mechanical titans that had consumed civilizations. The sound was primal, defiant, and utterly alien to every other species listening. These weren't the controlled tactical responses of civilized warfare. This was something older, rawer, and infinitely more dangerous. Zethkar found himself stepping back from his command console as he watched human ships ram Devourer vessels, their crews detonating their own reactors to take out enemy weapon systems. Others launched boarding pods directly into Devourer hulls, their occupants disappearing into mechanical nightmares that no sane being would willingly enter. For the first time in his life, Commander Zethkar felt something his species had forgotten existed, as he watched these small, fragile mammals throw themselves against impossible odds with what could only be described as joyful violence. A cold sensation spread through his exoskeleton. His hands trembled as he realized that humanity's reputation as harmless newcomers might be the galaxy's greatest miscalculation. The humans weren't just fighting the Devourers. They were enjoying it. The boarding pod Valkyrie 7 punched through the Devourer hull with enough force to leave a crater in the alien metal. Inside, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez checked his squad's equipment one final time as emergency lighting bathed their faces in hellish red. The 6 Marines with him represented humanity's finest, each carrying enough firepower to level a city block, and the training to use it in the cramped confines of enemy ships. "Remember, these things don't think like us," Rodriguez shouted over the screaming of tortured metal. "They're machines, but they adapt. Stay unpredictable, stay alive." The pod's doors exploded outward, revealing a corridor that defied conventional understanding of ship design. The walls pulsed with organic-looking conduits while mechanical components shifted and reconfigured themselves in response to the human intrusion. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something that triggered primitive warnings in their brainstems. Outside in space, Zethkar watched the tactical display with growing disbelief. 17 human boarding parties had successfully penetrated Devourer hulls, their life signs still active deep within ships that had consumed entire fleets in previous encounters. The rest of the Allied forces maintained their distance, following standard engagement protocols that suddenly seemed inadequate against an enemy that rebuilt itself faster than conventional weapons could damage it. "Sir, the humans are requesting tactical support for their boarding operations," Veltar reported, her voice uncertain. "They want us to target specific hull sections while their teams are still inside." The request bordered on insanity. Supporting fire into a ship with friendly forces aboard violated every military doctrine Zethkar had ever studied. Yet as he watched human ships continue their impossible dance through Devourer formations, he began to suspect that human military doctrine operated by entirely different rules. "Patch me through to Admiral Chen," he commanded. The human admiral's face appeared on the screen, sweat beading her forehead as she coordinated multiple battles simultaneously. Behind her, the bridge of the Indomitable showed damage from near misses, sparks flying from overloaded systems while her crew worked with mechanical efficiency. "Commander, good timing," Chen said without preamble. "We need concentrated fire on grid references I'm transmitting. Our people inside will clear the target zones in 90 seconds. Admiral, those coordinates put our fire danger close to your boarding teams. One targeting error and—" "Commander," Chen interrupted, her blue eyes locking with his through the holographic display. "Do you know what we call it when humans fight in impossible situations with everything stacked against them?" Zethkar's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "Suicide?" A grin spread across the Admiral's face that was somehow more unsettling than her earlier calm. Tuesday. Inside the Devourer ship, Rodriguez's team moved through corridors that seemed designed by nightmares. The walls shifted constantly, trying to seal passages behind them or create new routes to funnel them toward what were obviously kill zones. But the machines had made a critical error in their analysis of human behavior. Where logical species would retreat when faced with overwhelming odds, humans had a tendency to double down. Sanchez, plant charges on those power conduits, Rodriguez ordered, his voice steady despite the fact that they were walking through the digestive system of a ship that ate civilizations. Williams, find me an access port for the virus package. The Devourers had been studying galactic species for millennia, learning their weaknesses and adapting their tactics accordingly. They understood fear, retreat, self-preservation. What they had never encountered was a species that treated certain death as merely another tactical consideration. Private Williams found the access port, a cluster of fiber optic nerves that pulsed with data streams. She plugged in the human virus package, a piece of software that had been designed by their best hackers working with the assumption that any sufficiently advanced machine intelligence would have developed logical processes. The virus didn't try to destroy or override these processes. Instead, it introduced chaos, random variables that forced the Devourer systems to waste processing power on seemingly meaningless calculations. Package deployed, Williams reported. Systems are starting to fluctuate. Outside, Zethkar authorized the supporting fire mission against every instinct his species had developed over centuries of warfare. Valorian particle beams lanced into the Devourer hull at precisely the coordinates Admiral Chen had provided. The alien ship's armor, which had shrugged off their heaviest weapons moments before, suddenly developed critical vulnerabilities where the human teams had planted charges. The explosion that followed lit up the tactical display like a small star. When the energy dissipated, a quarter of the Devourer ship was simply gone, vented into space along with whatever mechanical horrors had been contained within. Yet incredibly, all human life signs remained active, their boarding teams having somehow positioned themselves in the sections that survived. How did they know? Veltar whispered, staring at the impossible accuracy of the human predictions. Zethkar was beginning to understand that this question would define his entire perception of humanity. They didn't just fight differently, they thought differently. Where his species planned campaigns with mathematical precision, humans seemed to operate on intuition, aggression, and an unsettling willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Admiral Chen's voice crackled across the communications array, again, but this time it was broadcast to all Allied forces. All ships, this is indomitable. We've confirmed that the Devourers have a critical weakness in their adaptation protocols. They can't process truly random behavior patterns. Time to show them what human unpredictability looks like. What followed challenged every assumption the galaxy held about proper military engagement. Human ships began attacking in patterns that seemed to have no logic whatsoever. They would charge straight at heavily defended positions, then suddenly veer away to strike at apparently random targets. They coordinated perfectly while following no discernible strategy, their movements resembling nothing so much as a pack of predators that had learned to hunt as individuals while maintaining group cohesion. The Devourers, machines designed to analyze and counter any threat, began showing signs of system overload. Their previously perfect formations started to develop gaps as they struggled to predict human behavior that seemed to defy prediction. Ships that had operated with mechanical precision for eons began making tactical errors, their ancient programming unable to adapt to an enemy that treated chaos as a weapon. Zethkar realized that his understanding of warfare had been fundamentally challenged. For centuries, his species had prided itself on tactical superiority through planning, preparation, and logical execution. The humans were demonstrating something far more terrifying, the ability to win through controlled madness, turning their own unpredictability into their greatest strategic asset. As he watched human marines fight their way through alien nightmares while their ships danced through impossible battles, Zethkar finally understood why his hands had begun to shake. It wasn't fear of the Devourers anymore. It was the dawning realization that humanity might be something far more dangerous than any mechanical plague the galaxy had ever faced. Deep within the mechanical heart of the lead Devourer vessel, Sergeant Rodriguez and his team had discovered something that defied their worst expectations. The ship wasn't just a machine, it was a cemetery. Corridors lined with transparent tubes contained the preserved remains of countless species, each one representing a civilization that had fallen to the mechanical plague. The Devourers hadn't simply destroyed their victims, they had studied them, catalogued them, and kept samples like trophies in some cosmic museum of extinction. "Jesus Christ," whispered Corporal Jackson, his voice barely audible through the comm system. "How many worlds did these things eat?" Rodriguez forced himself to focus on the mission despite the horror surrounding them. Each tube contained not just bodies, but data streams that pulsed with stored memories, personalities, and knowledge of entire species. The Devourers had been building a database of galactic intelligence, learning from every victory to ensure their next conquest would be even more efficient. "Stay focused," Rodriguez commanded, though his own voice carried the strain of what they were witnessing. "We're here to plant the quantum charge, not to sightsee." Outside in space, the battle had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. The Devourer fleet, once moving with perfect coordination, was beginning to show signs of confusion as human tactics continued to defy their analytical capabilities. Admiral Chen had split her forces into dozens of small units, each operating independently while somehow maintaining overall strategic coherence. Zethkar watched a human destroyer execute a maneuver that should have been impossible, using its own reactor as a weapon by venting plasma directly at a Devourer escort. The human ship survived the exchange through what could only be described as engineering madness, its crew having modified their shields to channel the plasma discharge into their weapon systems, actually growing stronger from their own suicidal attack. "Commander, incoming priority transmission from the Galactic Council," Veltar announced, her voice tight with stress. "They're demanding a full tactical assessment of human combat capabilities." The request sent a chill through Zethkar's exoskeleton. The Galactic Council had spent months debating whether to grant humanity full membership, their deliberations focusing on trade agreements and cultural exchanges. None of the elder species had seriously considered the military implications of bringing humans into their alliance. Now, as he watched human forces tear through defenses that had stymied the galaxy's finest warriors, Zethkar realized they might have invited something far more significant than simple new allies. "Tell the Council that human capabilities are still being assessed," he replied, deliberately vague. How could he explain that these newcomers were rewriting the fundamental rules of engagement? How could he describe tactics that seemed to border on madness yet produced impossible results? Admiral Chen's voice cut through his thoughts. "All Allied forces, this is indomitable. We're going to attempt something that's never been tried before. We're going to capture a Devourer command ship intact." The announcement sent shockwaves through the Allied fleet. In 3,000 years of recorded galactic history, no force had ever successfully boarded and captured a Devourer vessel. The machine's ships were designed to self-destruct rather than be taken, their hulls rigged with antimatter charges that would vaporize anything within a light-second radius. "Admiral," Zethkar transmitted, "the risk assessment for such an operation is irrelevant," Chen finished. "Commander, we've learned something from our boarding operations. The Devourers have been studying every species in the galaxy for millennia, learning their weaknesses, their fears, their breaking points. But they've never encountered humans before. They have no data on how we fight, how we think, or more importantly, how we refuse to stay dead when any reasonable species would give up." Rodriguez's team had reached the ship's central processing core, a chamber that stretched beyond the reach of their lights. Massive quantum processors hummed with the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 dead civilizations, their surfaces crawling with data streams that represented the final thoughts of entire species. The quantum charge they carried would not just destroy the ship, it would create a cascade failure that would corrupt the Devourer network across multiple systems. "Charge is armed," Rodriguez reported. "Estimated detonation in 12 minutes. But as his team prepared for extraction, the ship's defenses finally adapted to their presence. Corridors began sealing themselves with molecular-level precision, while internal atmosphere vented into space. The Devourers had decided that containing the human borders was worth sacrificing part of their own vessel. "Sir, we're trapped," Jackson reported, his voice steady despite their deteriorating situation. "Extraction routes are compromised." Rodriguez checked his team's equipment one more time, then made a decision that would have seemed insane to any other species in the galaxy. Then we go deeper. If they want to trap us in here with their nightmare collection, we'll show them what a real nightmare looks like. Admiral Chen was coordinating similar operations across multiple Devourer vessels. Her tactical display showing dozens of boarding teams trapped inside enemy ships with quantum charges, counting down to detonation. Any other commander would have ordered immediate evacuation, accepting the loss of the boarding parties to ensure the mission's success. But Chen had grown up studying military history on a world where tactical retreats were often considered failures of imagination rather than sound strategy. All teams. This is indomitable, she broadcast on the boarding frequency. You have approximately 10 minutes to make these machines understand why humans don't negotiate with extinction-level threats. Make it count. The response from her Marines was immediate and terrifying in its enthusiasm. Battle cries echoed through alien corridors as human teams stopped trying to escape and instead began hunting through the ships that held them captive. They had been transformed from trapped soldiers into something far more dangerous. Humans with nothing left to lose and the firepower to express their displeasure. Zethkar watched the tactical display in growing horror as human life signs moved deeper into Devourer vessels rather than toward extraction points. His sensors detected massive energy spikes throughout the alien fleet as human teams began targeting critical systems with complete disregard for their own survival. They weren't just setting charges anymore. They were actively dismantling the ships from the inside, turning their technical expertise into acts of mechanical vandalism on a scale that defied comprehension. "Sir," Veltar whispered, "the human casualty projections don't apply." Zethkar finished, his voice hoarse with realization. "They're not planning to survive this. They're planning to win it." For the first time in his military career, Zethkar truly understood the difference between tactics and warfare. His species had mastered tactics, the art of winning battles through superior planning and execution. But humans had revealed something far more primal, the willingness to accept any cost, pay any price, and sacrifice anything to ensure their enemies didn't survive the encounter. As the first quantum charges detonated and Devourer command ships began disappearing in cascades of exotic energy, Zethkar realized that the galaxy's balance of power had shifted permanently. The humans hadn't just defeated the Devourers. They had done so in a way that announced, to every civilization watching, that Earth's children were not merely another member species to be cataloged and categorized. They were apex predators who had just discovered that the galaxy was full of prey. The quantum explosions rippled through space-time itself, each detonation creating cascading failures that spread through the Devourer network like a virus of destruction. Rodriguez and his team had vanished in the first blast, their life signs disappearing in a flash of exotic energy that took half the lead command ship with them. But their sacrifice had triggered something unprecedented in galactic warfare, a domino effect that was turning the mechanical plague's greatest strength into their fatal weakness. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as her tactical display showed impossible readings. The Devourer fleet, which had operated as a single coordinated entity for millennia, was fragmenting. Ships that had shared processing power across light years of space were suddenly isolated, their collective intelligence shattered by the quantum charges her boarding teams had detonated in precise locations throughout their network. "All ships, press the attack," she commanded, her voice carrying across every allied vessel in the system. "The Devourers are blind and scattered. Show them what happens when predators become prey." Zethkar found himself caught between admiration and terror as he watched the human fleet exploit the opening they had created through sacrifice. Human ships moved with pack-hunting precision, targeting isolated Devourer vessels that could no longer coordinate their defenses. But what disturbed him most was the efficiency of their attacks. These weren't desperate gambits anymore. They were calculated extermination protocols executed with mechanical precision that rivaled the Devourers themselves. "Commander," Veltar reported, her voice tight with disbelief, "the human vessels are broadcasting surrender demands to the Devourer fleet." The idea was so audacious it bordered on madness. The Devourers had never surrendered in recorded history. They were machines programmed for consumption and expansion, incapable of fear or self-preservation in any conventional sense. Yet Admiral Chen's voice rang out across all frequencies. her words translated into every known galactic language. Attention, Devourer Fleet. You have consumed your last civilization. Surrender now and we'll make your deactivation quick. Continue fighting and we'll show you what humans do to things that threaten our friends. The response from the Devourer Fleet was immediate and terrifying. Instead of their usual tactical silence, the machines began broadcasting on all frequencies, their transmissions a chaotic mix of data streams and what could only be described as electronic screaming. The ancient machines were experiencing something their creators had never programmed them for: panic. On the Indomitable's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Torres monitored the alien communications with growing fascination. She had spent years studying xenolinguistics, but nothing had prepared her for translating the distress calls of panicking artificial intelligences. The Devourers were attempting to re-establish their network connections, but the quantum charges had created interference patterns that turned their own communication systems against them. "Admiral, I'm reading massive power fluctuations throughout their fleet," Torres reported. "They're trying to execute collective processing protocols, but something's preventing synchronization." Chen smiled with predatory satisfaction. "The quantum charges didn't just damage their network, Lieutenant. They introduced random variables into their base programming. Every time they try to link up, our chaos algorithms force them to process impossible equations. They're literally thinking themselves into system failures." The revelation sent chills through every non-human observer in the Allied fleet. The humans hadn't just attacked the Devourer's ships. They had weaponized mathematics itself, turning the machines' greatest strength, their collective intelligence, into a vulnerability that grew worse with every attempt to coordinate. Zethkar watched as Devourer vessels began showing signs of genuine malfunction. Ships that had moved with perfect precision for millennia started executing random maneuvers, their hulls venting atmosphere and energy as internal systems failed in cascade patterns. The machines were experiencing something that no artificial intelligence had ever been designed to handle: madness. "Sir, the Devourers are requesting communication," Feltar announced, her voice barely concealing her shock. "They want to negotiate." Admiral Chen's response was swift and merciless. "Patch them through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing not the smooth mechanical interface the Devourers usually projected, but a chaotic jumble of visual static punctuated by fragments of alien faces, the last memories of species they had consumed. The artificial intelligence that spoke was clearly damaged, its voice a discordant mix of mechanical tones and organic screams. "Human entities," the Devourer transmission began, each word seeming to cause the system physical pain. "Your methods are incompatible with survival protocols. We request cessation of hostilities." Chen's expression didn't change. "You came to our space. You threatened our allies. You tried to add us to your collection of dead civilizations. Why should we stop?" The pause that followed was filled with electronic noise that sounded disturbingly like sobbing. When the Devourer responded, its voice had taken on harmonics that suggested genuine terror. "We did not understand. Your species processes fear differently. You weaponize terror, turn it into strength. We cannot adapt to illogical responses." "You're right," Chen agreed, her voice carrying a cold satisfaction that made Zethkar's exoskeleton crawl. "You can't adapt to us because you've spent millennia studying civilized species. Logical species. Species that value their own survival above victory. We're not civilized, and we never have been. We're barely domesticated primates who learned to build starships. And the only reason we haven't exterminated ourselves is because we keep finding better targets." The Allied fleet listened in stunned silence as Admiral Chen delivered what amounted to humanity's formal introduction to the galaxy. Her words painted a picture of a species that had climbed to the top of their world's food chain, not through superior intelligence or planning, but through an unmatched capacity for violence combined with just enough cooperation to turn that violence outward. "You want to know what makes humans different?" Chen continued, her voice growing colder with each word. "Every other species in this galaxy fears extinction. We've been planning for it since we learned to think. We've built weapons that could sterilize our own world, fought wars that killed hundreds of millions, and survived ice ages, plagues, and disasters that would have ended most civilizations. We don't fear death. We've made friends with it. The Devourer response came as a cascade of system failures across their entire fleet. Ships that had operated for eons began shutting down their primary systems, their artificial intelligences unable to process the logical paradox of a species that treated extinction as a tactical option rather than an ultimate defeat. Zethkar realized that humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy in terms that every intelligent species would understand. They weren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They were something far more dangerous. Survivors who had learned that the best defense against extinction was making sure nothing else survived to threaten them. As the last Devourer vessels either surrendered or self-destructed rather than face capture, Zethkar found himself wondering if the galaxy had just been saved or conquered. The distinction, he was beginning to understand, might not matter to the humans. In the aftermath of the Devourer defeat, Kepler Station had become the galaxy's most important diplomatic location overnight. Representatives from every major civilization converged on the facility, ostensibly to congratulate the Allied forces on their victory. But Zethkar could read the fear in their body language, the careful way they avoided looking directly at the human delegation, the subtle positioning that kept maximum distance between themselves and Admiral Chen's staff. The debriefing session had been running for 6 hours, and the questions kept circling back to the same central concern. Exactly what had the galaxy invited into its midst when they granted humanity membership in the Galactic Council? Every species present had studied the tactical recordings, analyzed the human combat methods, and reached conclusions that challenged their fundamental understanding of civilized warfare. Admiral Chen, began Ambassador Thisara of the Crystalline Collective, her translucent form shimmering with barely controlled anxiety. Your boarding team sustained 100% casualties during the operation. Yet your after-action reports classify this as an acceptable outcome. How do your people reconcile such losses with military victory? Chen's response was delivered with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the battle. Ambassador, you're operating under a false assumption. Our boarding teams didn't sustain casualties, they achieved their objectives. Every one of those Marines knew the mission parameters before they volunteered. In human military doctrine, mission success is measured by whether the enemy can continue to threaten innocent lives, not by how many of our people return home. The statement sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. The Crystalline Collective had evolved from a species that valued individual consciousness above all else, viewing each death as an irreplaceable loss to their collective knowledge. The human casual acceptance of tactical sacrifices struck them as fundamentally alien. Zethkar studied the human delegation carefully. They showed no signs of the triumph he would have expected from a species that had just won their first major galactic conflict. Instead, they displayed the efficient professionalism of technicians who had completed a routine maintenance operation. The contrast between their devastating effectiveness and their emotional restraint was somehow more unsettling than their battlefield ferocity had been. There's another matter that requires discussion, interjected Grand Marshal Korath of the Hegemony Forces, his multiple eyes focusing on Chen with predatory intensity. Our analysis indicates that human forces possessed detailed intelligence about Devourer weaknesses that no other species had discovered in 3 millennia of encounters. How did you acquire this information? Chen exchanged glances with her intelligence officer, Commander Torres, before responding. We analyzed their behavioral patterns during the initial engagement and extrapolated probable vulnerabilities based on our own experience with artificial intelligence systems. In the space of a few hours? Korath's voice carried skeptical undertones that suggested he suspected human preparation went back much further than they were admitting. Commander Torres can provide the technical details, Chen replied, gesturing to her intelligence officer. Torres stood, activating a holographic display that showed complex algorithmic structures. The Devourers made a critical error in their initial assessment of human capabilities. They analyzed our technology, our ship designs, our apparent military doctrine, and concluded we represented a minor threat. What they failed to analyze was our approach to problem solving. The display shifted to show human historical data, streams of information about terrestrial conflicts, technological development, and cultural evolution. Every species in this galaxy developed along similar patterns. Tool use, agriculture, writing, mathematics, interstellar travel. each step building logically on the previous one. Humans followed the same basic progression, but with one critical difference. The hologram zoomed in on a specific data cluster that showed patterns of innovation during periods of extreme crisis. We've always done our best thinking when we're about to die. Starvation led to agricultural revolution. Plague drove medical advancement. Global war accelerated our technological development by centuries. The devourers had never encountered a species that treated extinction-level threats as learning opportunities. Ambassador Thisiara's form flickered with distress. You're describing a species that requires mortal danger to achieve technological progress. How is such a civilization sustainable? Torres smiled, and Zethkar noticed that her expression carried the same predatory satisfaction he had seen in Admiral Chen. It's sustainable because we've learned to create our own challenges when natural ones aren't sufficient. Every advancement in human technology comes from asking one fundamental question: how do we kill the things that are trying to kill us? The briefing room fell silent as the implications of this statement settled over the assembled delegates. The humans hadn't just defeated the devourers through superior tactics or random luck. They had approached the problem with the accumulated experience of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history in a state of barely controlled warfare against everything from natural disasters to each other. Your people weaponized philosophy, Zethkar said, finally finding his voice. You turned your own survival instincts into a military doctrine. Not just military doctrine, Chen corrected. Our entire civilization is built around the assumption that something is always trying to end us. Our social structures, our technology, our exploration programs, even our art and literature reflect this basic truth. We don't just prepare for disasters. We expect them, plan for them, and when they arrive, we treat them as opportunities to become stronger. Grand Marshal Korath leaned forward, his predatory focus intensifying. And now that you've eliminated the greatest existential threat the galaxy has faced in recorded history, what new challenges will humanity seek? The question hung in the air like a physical presence, and Zethkar realized that every delegate in the room was holding their breath for the answer. Chen's response would determine whether humanity would be welcomed as protectors of galactic civilization or feared as its potential destroyers. That depends, Chen said slowly, her eyes scanning the assembled representatives, on whether the galaxy wants to remain a collection of isolated civilizations watching each other from safe distances, or become something stronger. The devourers weren't the only threat out there. They were just the first one we've encountered. She gestured to the tactical displays still showing the battle's aftermath. Our long-range sensors have detected signals from beyond the galactic rim. The devourers were scouts, advanced elements of something larger. Whatever sent them is still out there, and it's had 3,000 years to study every defeat the devourers suffered before they encountered us. The revelation struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. They had assumed the devourer defeat represented the end of an ancient threat, not the beginning of a larger conflict. But as Zethkar looked at the tactical projections Chen was sharing, he realized that humanity had been planning for this possibility from the moment they entered the battle. You're saying the galaxy faces a greater threat than the devourers? Ambassador Thisiara asked, her form brightening with stress patterns. We're saying the galaxy has always faced threats greater than any individual species could handle alone, Chen replied. The difference is that now you have allies who specialize in impossible odds. The question isn't whether humanity will seek new challenges. We've already found them. The question is whether the rest of the galaxy wants to face them together or watch from the sidelines while we handle them alone. Zethkar felt the familiar chill of fear spreading through his exoskeleton. But this time it wasn't directed at the humans. It was the realization that after witnessing their capabilities firsthand, the galaxy might not survive whatever threats remained without their help. 3 weeks after the briefing, Zethkar found himself aboard the human vessel Indomitable, serving as liaison officer for the newly formed Joint Defense Initiative. The assignment had been presented as an honor, recognition of his species' military expertise and their successful cooperation during the Devourer crisis. But as he walked through the ship's corridors, studying the humans in their natural environment, he began to understand that this was actually an intelligence-gathering mission disguised as diplomatic courtesy. The Indomitable was unlike any warship he had ever seen. Where other species designed their vessels with efficiency and comfort in mind, The humans had built something that felt more like a mechanical predator. Every surface showed evidence of constant modification and improvement, with new systems grafted onto existing structures in ways that suggested endless preparation for unknown threats. Commander Zethkar called Lieutenant Commander Torres as she approached through the ship's main corridor. Admiral Chen would like you to observe our tactical planning session. We're developing contingency protocols for the next phase of operations, Zeth. Carr followed her to a briefing room where a dozen human officers were clustered around holographic displays, showing the galaxy's outer rim. The data streams flowing across their screens represented long-range sensor readings, deep space reconnaissance reports, and probability analyses that painted a disturbing picture of what lay beyond known space. Admiral Chen looked up as they entered, her expression carrying the focused intensity that Zethkar had learned to associate with human strategic thinking. Commander, perfect timing. We're discussing how to prepare the galaxy for what's coming. The central display shifted to show sensor readings from the galactic edge, where automated monitoring stations had detected massive energy signatures moving through intergalactic space. The patterns suggested artificial structures of enormous size, easily dwarfing anything in the current galaxy's technological capability. Our analysis indicates we have approximately 18 months before the next wave arrives, Chen explained, her voice carrying matter-of-fact certainty about a timeline that should have been speculation. Based on the Devourer's final transmissions before they were destroyed, we know they were advanced scouts for something called the Harvest Fleet. Zethkar studied the tactical projections with growing unease. The energy signatures suggested vessels that made Devourer ships look like fighter craft by comparison. How can you be certain of the timeline? Torres activated another display showing decoded Devourer communications. We recovered significant data from their command networks before the quantum charges eliminated them. The Harvest Fleet operates on predetermined schedules, arriving to collect the results of Devourer operations every few millennia. They're not explorers or conquerors in any conventional sense, they're farmers and we're the crop. The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The galaxy hadn't just faced an invasion force. They had unknowingly been part of a cultivation program that spanned geological timescales. Every civilization, every technological advancement, every war and peace treaty had been allowed to develop for the sole purpose of creating more sophisticated resources for an alien harvest. The good news, Chen continued with unsettling optimism, is that the Harvest Fleet won't be expecting resistance. Their entire operational doctrine is based on collecting from civilizations that have been softened up by Devourer operations over millennia. They've never encountered a galaxy that fought back successfully. Major Harrison, the Indomitable's tactical officer, highlighted specific portions of the sensor data. We're detecting at least 47 massive signatures, each one roughly the size of a small moon. Conservative estimates suggest each ship carries enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. Any other species would have treated such intelligence as a death sentence for galactic civilization. But as Zethkar watched the human officers analyze the threat, he noticed their body language suggested excitement rather than despair. They were approaching the Harvest Fleet the same way they had approached the Devourers, as a problem to be solved through applied violence and creative thinking. What kind of resistance are you planning? Zethkar asked, though he suspected the answer would challenge his understanding of reasonable military doctrine. Chen smiled with predatory anticipation. We're going to teach the galaxy how humans prepare for extinction-level threats. Every species, every world, every available resource is going to be converted into weapons, fortifications, or tactical assets. We have 18 months to turn this galaxy into something the Harvest Fleet has never encountered, a meat grinder. The holographic display shifted again, showing preliminary plans that defied conventional strategic thinking. The humans weren't planning to defend specific worlds or systems. They were designing a campaign that would turn the entire galaxy into a battlefield, with every space lane, asteroid belt, and planetary system converted into potential killing zones. The crystalline collective's manufacturing capabilities will be retooled to produce quantum mines, Torres explained, highlighting specific star systems. The Thoraxian breeding colonies will be converted to rapid deployment shipyards. The hegemony's strategic reserves will be distributed throughout the outer rim as supply depots for long-term guerrilla operations. Zethkar realized that humanity had spent the 3 weeks since the Devourer defeat conducting a comprehensive analysis of every allied species' capabilities, not for diplomatic purposes but for military integration. They had identified exactly how each civilization could contribute to a defense strategy that treated the entire galaxy as a single weapons system. "What about civilian populations?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "There won't be any," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "Every sentient being in the galaxy will receive military training appropriate to their species' capabilities. Children will learn to operate sensor arrays and communication systems. Elderly individuals will staff logistics networks. Everyone else will either fight directly or support those who do." The plan was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The humans were proposing to militarize an entire galaxy, converting thousands of peaceful civilizations into components of a massive war machine designed for one purpose: making any invasion so costly that even victory would be indistinguishable from defeat. "How do you know the other species will agree to this?" Zethkar asked. Torres exchanged glances with Admiral Chen before responding. "Because we're going to show them the alternative. We recovered complete records from the Devourer databases, including detailed documentation of every civilization they've harvested over the past 50,000 years. Once the Council sees what happens to species that don't fight back, they'll understand that cooperation isn't optional anymore." Zethkar felt a familiar chill as he realized that humanity was offering the galaxy a choice between two forms of extinction: death by harvest or transformation into something unrecognizable. The humans weren't just proposing to save galactic civilization. They were planning to replace it with something that could survive in a universe where peaceful coexistence was apparently a luxury that attracted predators. "There's one more thing," Chen added, her voice carrying undertones that suggested this was the most important part of the briefing. "We need to accelerate the timeline for revealing certain human capabilities that we've kept classified until now." The statement sent new waves of unease through Zethkar's consciousness. The humans had demonstrated impossible tactical abilities during the Devourer crisis, but Chen was suggesting they had been holding back even more advanced capabilities. "What kind of capabilities?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Chen's smile carried implications that made Zethkar's exoskeleton crawl with primitive warnings. The kind that explain why a species barely a century into space travel was able to defeat an enemy that had been consuming civilizations since before your ancestors learned to use tools. The revelation came in the form of a classified briefing held in the Indomitable's most secure compartment, a chamber that Zethkar's sensors indicated was somehow isolated from normal spacetime. The dozen officers present represented the galaxy's highest military clearance levels, each one sworn to absolute secrecy about what they were about to witness. Admiral Chen stood before a massive holographic display that remained dark, her expression carrying the weight of information that could reshape galactic civilization. "What I'm about to show you changes everything we thought we knew about human capabilities," Chen began, her voice unusually grave. "For the past 18 months since before we made formal contact with the Galactic Council, humanity has been conducting classified operations that violate several fundamental laws of physics as currently understood." The holographic display activated, showing what appeared to be empty space in a remote sector beyond the galactic rim. Suddenly, without any visible transition or energy signature, a massive fleet materialized from nothing. Hundreds of ships, each clearly of human design but incorporating technology that shouldn't have existed, appeared as if reality itself had been rewritten to accommodate their presence. "Temporal displacement operations," Chen explained as the assembled officers stared in stunned silence. "We've been sending advance forces backwards and forwards through localized time streams, establishing strategic positions and gathering intelligence before threats even develop." Zethkar felt his understanding of causality crumble as he watched human vessels operating in what appeared to be parallel time streams. The ships moved through space in patterns that suggested they were responding to events that hadn't happened yet, coordinating with versions of themselves from alternate temporal coordinates. "The Devourer crisis was never actually a crisis for humanity," Torres added, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone reporting on routine operations. "We had been monitoring their approach for subjective decades before they entered this galaxy. Every tactical maneuver you witnessed was the result of hundreds of previous iterations, timeline adjustments made until we achieved optimal outcomes. The implications struck every non-human officer simultaneously. The battle they had thought was humanity's first exposure to galactic-scale warfare had actually been a carefully orchestrated performance. With the humans playing out scenarios they had already perfected through temporal manipulation. How is this possible? Grand Marshal Korath demanded, his multiple eyes focusing on displays that challenged his species' understanding of advanced physics. Temporal manipulation on this scale should require energy expenditures exceeding the output of entire star systems. Chen's smile carried undertones that suggested this question revealed another layer of human capabilities that had remained hidden. It would, if we were generating the energy ourselves. But humans have never been particularly good at creating resources. We're much better at finding them and taking them from things that don't need them anymore. The display shifted to show massive structures hidden throughout normal space, installations that Zethkar's sensors had somehow failed to detect despite their enormous size. They appeared to be connected to natural phenomena, pulsars, black holes, stellar formation regions, in ways that suggested humanity had learned to tap directly into cosmic-scale energy sources. We've been building this infrastructure for over 2 centuries, Chen continued. Every major cosmic event in this galaxy for the past 500 years has been subtly influenced by human temporal engineering. Supernovae timed to create specific resource distributions, stellar formations guided to produce optimal manufacturing materials. Even the development of various species, civilizations has been influenced to ensure maximum tactical capability when the time came to face existential threats. Zethkar realized that humanity hadn't just hidden their advanced technology from the galaxy. They had been secretly managing galactic development for centuries, shaping events to create the optimal conditions for survival when the real threats arrived. Every species, including his own, had been unknowingly participating in a human-directed preparation program. The Devourer defeat was a demonstration, Torres explained, designed to reveal human capabilities in a controlled manner that would encourage galactic cooperation without triggering panic or resistance. Every aspect of the battle was calculated to produce the exact psychological and political outcomes necessary for the next phase of operations. Ambassador Thaisara's crystalline form flickered, with patterns that indicated deep cognitive distress. You're describing a level of manipulation that spans centuries. How many of our civilization's decisions have been genuinely our own? All of them, Chen replied immediately. Human temporal engineering doesn't override free will or force specific choices. We've simply ensured that when those choices were made, the resources and opportunities existed to make beneficial decisions possible. Every species developed according to their own nature and values. We just made sure the galaxy would be strong enough to survive what's coming. The display showed new tactical projections that incorporated humanity's hidden capabilities. The Harvest Fleet approaching from intergalactic space would encounter not just a galaxy that had fought off their advanced scouts, but a reality that had been systematically engineered to turn their invasion into a trap spanning multiple time streams. The defense strategy isn't just about converting galactic resources into weapons, Major Harrison explained. We're going to use temporal displacement to create multiple overlapping combat zones where the same battle occurs across different timeline coordinates. The Harvest Fleet will face not just our current forces, but versions of those forces from probability streams where we've had additional preparation time. Zethkar tried to process the strategic implications of warfare conducted across multiple timelines simultaneously. Human forces wouldn't just outnumber their enemies. They would be fighting with the benefit of having already won the battle in alternate realities, bringing that tactical knowledge back to the primary time stream. There's one final component, Chen said, her voice carrying undertones that suggested this was the most crucial element of the entire operation. The Harvest Fleet operates on the assumption that they're farming civilizations that developed naturally. They've never encountered a galaxy where one species achieved temporal manipulation capabilities and used them to uplift their neighbors. The holographic display showed the final phase of human preparation. Massive installations capable of extending temporal manipulation capabilities to allied forces. Every species in the galaxy would receive access to human time displacement technology, turning the entire galactic alliance into a multi-dimensional military force operating across parallel time streams. We're not just defending this galaxy, Chen concluded. her words carrying implications that redefined the scope of the conflict. We're creating a template for how intelligent life responds to cosmic-scale predation. If we succeed, the techniques developed here can be transmitted to other galaxies facing similar threats. Humanity's real mission isn't just survival, it's teaching the universe how to fight back. As Zethkar absorbed the full scope of humanity's hidden agenda, he realized that his fear had evolved into something approaching awe. The humans hadn't just joined galactic civilization. They had been quietly preparing it for a war that would determine whether intelligence itself could survive in a universe full of predators. The galaxy had thought it was gaining new allies. Instead, it had unknowingly recruited the universe's first truly effective cosmic defense specialists. The only question remaining was whether the rest of creation was ready for the revolution humanity was about to unleash on the fundamental nature of interstellar warfare.